Nice job. Nice job. Good job, band. That's a good job. Awesome. Hey, and introduce our trumpet player again.
Right there, that's Miles Belvin on the
Miles
trumpet and
Belvin.
flugelhorn.
It's good to have him.
Name.
Yep.
And Beret.
We always love how our Jim and David do the saxophone. It's always fun. Adding a third horn in there is always more interesting, and so it's nice when we can bring in somebody extra. So we're glad to have y'all. I'm going to let y'all step down from the hot stage. Y'all take a break, and then we'll be back in a second. A couple of things, though, about this. You know, jazz is based on that. You could hear it. You could hear the simple sort of the foundation. Bum, 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 right? You could hear that foundation, and everything was played on top of it. And it went all over the place, and then it came back, and it went all over the place. And as I was listening to these folks, to the band members kind of each taking their own solo and just experimenting with it, you know, there's a level of trust that's present there. There's also an amazing amount of graciousness. Because those of us who are musicians might have heard, oh, that was kind of a sour, that note really didn't fit in the scale. They went way off scale there. They just kind of went off in another place and came right back. There's a lot of graciousness allowed one another. And I thought, you know, what would it be like to be in a group where you're just allowed to be you? You're just allowed to bring yourself authentically to the moment because you know that at root, there is something sustaining all of us, right? I mean, how amazing would that be to experience that? And everyone takes their own riff. You know, it'd be a weird community, but that's okay because everybody's kind of doing their own thing, but we're all rooted by that same thing, that same grounded one sort of note that holds us together. So do y'all know what it is that holds us all together? Do you know what that one note is? Love. Love. Love's a good answer. Love's a good answer. What'd you say? Yes and. Yes, right. Yes, love, and what? What is it do you think everybody wants? Acceptance. Yeah. We've talked about that in here before, that we're all wearing a shirt that says, love me. We all want to belong. We all want to be connected. We're social creatures, in spite of how we sometimes act. We really are social creatures. And the challenge for us, I think, is this idea that, you know, I have asymmetric problems. I can't see anything off balance. It's really hard for me. Don't ever invite me to your house. I mean, I'm going to straighten things up all the time. You need me over there? Okay. Yeah, this is what we're rooted in. And this is the problem that the Galatians were finding when they first got, when Paul writes this, and I love the way that the message describes it. I love the way that Eugene Peterson describes it in the Message. He says, what's going on with you people? Have you people gone crazy? It's like somebody in your group put a hex on you. I mean, you can't get it right. How hard is this? Because what the Galatian community was doing, you know, the early church community of Christians, of followers of Jesus, followers of the way, they were called back then, essentially. And they're all disagreeing because they're coming from different backgrounds. They're fighting over what's ritual and appropriate and what's not appropriate, who's in and who's not in unless they do certain things. They're already fighting over this. And Paul is like, what happened? How did you lose what's important, right? How did you lose the very essence of why we're here? We're here to be a part of the kingdom of God. And I use the kingdom intentionally because we are kin. You know, the root word of kind is kin. The root word of kind is this idea of connection. So kindness naturally flows out of connection. But they'd lost it. And Paul's saying, like, I don't get this. This is the craziest thing. You've completely gone out of your senses. This whole series has been about finding different ways to express honestly who we are, finding our authentic self, but realizing in this me kind of focused world and this sort of the power of the individual world that we live in the West, you know, this Western sort of myth of the rugged individual and making it in the world, that the gospel says that's not really what it's about. It's about the kingdom. It's about everybody. Daryl and I and Mike Phillips and Austin Austin Patton, which a lot of you know Austin, who's our AV guy. He oversees all the AV of the church. And Daryl came up to me, and I'll get back to this in a minute, but Daryl came up to me last year ago or so, and he says, could we do a drum group? Could we do a drum facilitation kind of group, which is meeting again this next Tuesday, right? Some of you have been to that. More of you should try this out. It's a pretty amazing experience, and it meets at 7 o'clock in Wesley Hall in the big building across the parking lot. But it was like, well, let's go ahead and do this and see what happens. And if you've been to a drum group, you realize that the moment you think it's about you, the moment you get self-preoccupied with whether or not I'm playing the drum right, or you get preoccupied with, I can really play the drum, I need to let them know how good I am, either direction, and you destroy the community. It completely falls apart. It only takes one person to make a community fall apart, to make a group fall apart. And sometimes it's because we're preoccupied, we're self-conscious, we're anxious. But what the group offers, what a drumming experience offers, for example, like any kind of improv group offers, is the number one, like the gospel offers, is the number one foundational concept that you are accepted. That's a given. You belong. Now, let's offer something to one another. And as you pay attention to one another, the drumming finds its pattern. Daryl could stand up and tell you how amazing it is, Mike too, how amazing it is to be in this group of half of whom have never touched a drum and are terrified that they're going to completely screw something up. And then suddenly they are playing rhythm patterns. And we're not talking powwow patterns. We're talking complex, syncopated rhythm patterns because they've stopped paying attention to themselves and they're paying attention to the group. You know this is true, I think, probably in places where you've been. The more we think less of ourselves, the more things seem to work better. They seem to come together. So here's the interesting thing about improvisation. I'm going to give you a couple of the sort of standard rules. Jakey already mentioned one, which is this idea of yes and. Everything is an offering in improvisation, in jazz. In the gospel, we're rooted in grace. And this is what Paul tries to remind the group. One another's diversity, one another's differences are part of the giftedness of community. That's a gift. Everything's offering in improvisation. So the challenge is not to decide whether or not it's not what I like. The challenge is to decide how can I participate in this gift I've been given. Now, to try to see a problem that way, it's hard. It's hard to even say it. See your problem as a gift, right? I mean, even hearing that sounds simplistic. It sounds trite, as if to trivialize what I'm going through. And that's not at all what I'm saying when I say that our life experiences are offerings, that all of life is offering. What I'm trying to say is that all of life provides us the invitation and the opportunity to participate in whatever we're dealing with. Improvisation's second rule, yes and, second rule is show up. What do you do with the problem? You show up. Sometimes it's painful, but you show up. Sometimes it's unclear what the next thing should be, but you show up. And you open rather than run. And when you do that, what you start to find out is there are things you didn't see. There are things we didn't realize about ourselves. The problem with what's going on at the border right now is not just the inhumaneness of what's going on, for example, in our world. That's not simply the problem. The problem is that we fail to see that we're all part of the same game. We're all part of the same sandbox. According to the gospel, what the gospel says is that God at the heart of our reality says, remember what's at the heart of all of our reality. We are all interconnected in God's love and grace. So our first response isn't, I'm sorry, you're infringing upon me, or I'm sorry, you're threatening this. Our first response is, how can we help? I don't mean to say it's not going to be complicated. I don't mean to say it's not going to be awkward. I don't mean to say it's not an answer for our economy or for our politics or for how our society lives. I'm saying that what the gospel says is The sandbox is everybody. Everybody's in the sandbox. The problem is that sometimes we forget that, right? Because we all know people who, when they jump in the sandbox, it's now my sandbox. And the problem with that is they don't realize that they already belong. They don't realize that they already belong in the sandbox, so they're fighting really hard to take control of the sandbox. But all of us that realize we're a part of this bigger picture realize that it's more interesting if everybody realizes they're a part of this bigger picture. Does that make sense? I know it's a little bit hard. I know it's a little bit counterintuitive for some of us too. It's just like dealing with our problems. It's counterintuitive to see that our problems can actually be a path towards something. That the obstacle can actually be a pathway towards something else. But improvisation, that's what's the gift of improvisation, is this idea that everything is offering and that there's no mistakes. We participate. We show up, we say yes, and then we add to. The spirit of improvisation, this is the other thing that I wanted to say about this idea of improvisation. I did this a lot as a kid, and maybe you did this. When my brother would come in and he would argue with me and then he'd call me a name, you know what I said? Some of you are thinking it. Takes one to know one. Right? Come on, who said that? Come on, who said that growing up as a kid, right? Who says it every now and then at your workplace, you know? Right? Guy is such a jerk, takes one to know one. You know, I mean, Jesus said, when it comes to spirit, where two or more are gathered, that's where I'm present. One of my favorite scientists of history, 20th century scientist, a guy named Gregory Bateson. Some of y'all may remember Gregory Bateson, a famous anthropologist. His wife was Margaret Mead, and he was more than an anthropologist. He was also basically the father of systems theory, and he discovered all sorts of interconnected things with cybernetics. But one thing that he started to realize is this interconnectedness stuff. As he traveled around the world and studied different cultures, he started to understand this interconnectedness of us all. And so he came up with a phrase that sort of became his coined phrase, his most familiar phrase, which was, "It takes two to know one." Because we don't know anything except in relationship. Anything I say that you disagree with, I have no idea who I really am in relation to you until you speak with me. I have no idea who you are until you speak with me and we start to share and we start to listen to one another. But it takes two to know one. And where three or more are gathered, it becomes community. And it doesn't become community because it's a tribe where everybody thinks alike now. It becomes community because three's a crowd. If it's working right, that third one comes in here and says, wait a minute, I see something else. And then the two of us have to figure it out. We have to see it as offering and move forward with that. It takes two to know one is the basic concept behind improvisation. We don't know ourselves well until we listen to others. So a couple of final thoughts here really quickly as the band is up, getting ready up here. Improvisation is not about being safe. It's about taking risks. But more than anything, it's about having the courage to show up. Because we know we belong in the end, and we trust that one another has something to offer. No mistakes, just something to offer. And it never ends there. It just continues to move on, to move up from there. We also know that improvisation is not about how well we give, which is interesting. I'd say the hardest thing in our lives that we rarely think about is knowing how well to receive. Now, I'm not talking about receiving what you want. What we'd like to have in terms of our problems is a genie in our pocket. Right? And for some of us, God is like a genie in our pocket. For some of us, that's what we think should be happening. But in here, and at least for me, I understand God so much less in terms of the vertical relationship. I understand the vertical becomes obvious in the horizontal. So that when Jesus is sitting down with 5,000 people and there's plenty of grass up on the side of the hill, it's time to be related. It's time to share. And while some people want to say, oh, it was a massive miracle, I would rather say, no, it's more like stone soup. It's more like one person gives and another person receives, and then they're inspired to give, and another person receives, and they're inspired to give. And before you know it, everyone's being taken care of. Because of this relational understanding that it takes more of us to make reality happen. It takes all of us to make reality happen. So it's not so much how we give in improvisation, it's how well we learn to receive what is given to us. And then finally, I want to think about this idea that it's not so much how we speak in improvisation, because if you've been in an improv group, which I have and I have a difficult time, the first thing you want to do is when somebody sets a scene like what Jakey did, you want to step in and go, I got a funny punch right now. I got the perfect punch for this. And someone else steps in front and says something, and it completely takes it off into another direction. But you weren't listening. You were speaking. So it's not about how well we speak in improv. It's about how well we hear that makes all the difference. Amen.